There was no in between with Cam Newton. You either loved him and his fun style of playing the game, or you hated him, seeing him as immature, reckless, and arrogant. What you cannot deny is that in his prime, Cam Newton was a good quarterback that could hold his own in the modern NFL. Heck, the 2015 season gives me so much nostalgia that I made a whole video on it. But today, we're not talking about that magical 2015 run. Today, we're talking about Cam Newton's fall from grace and how an MVP's career was stolen from him. I think 2016 is a really good place to start, so let's pass Super Bowl 50. Cam Newton is getting clowned on social media for the whole fumble thing. Well, the fact was that Newton is still the reigning MVP, and the Panthers are the reigning NFC champs, so they were expected to come back with vengeance, looking to finish the job this time. The 2016 season starts, and it doesn't really start on the best note for Cam Newton or the Panthers in general, and a 20-21 loss to the Denver Broncos. Cam Newton threw for just 194 yards, throwing one touchdown pass and one interception, being sacked 3 times, and having a quarterback rating of 69.5. And honestly, analysts were just saying like, oh, well, Cam Newton just can't get past the Broncos. The Panthers are going to be okay. They're still a talented team. They're going to make the playoffs. This is just a slow start. Well, a slow start turned into a pretty disappointing season for Newton and the Panthers, as they would finish 6-10. Cam Newton would finish with a really solid 3,500 passing yards, but only 19 touchdowns and 14 interceptions, getting sacked 36 times. This sack number could be the reason that Cam Newton missed the 5th game of the season against the Tampa Bay Buccaneers with a concussion, and why the Panthers announced at the end of the year that Cam Newton would have rotator cuff surgery on his throwing shoulder. In 2017, the shoulder didn't really seem to be holding Cam Newton back like many analysts thought, as he threw for 3,300 passing yards, 22 touchdowns, and a reckless 16 interceptions. But he led the Panthers to a playoff berth while being one of the most fun offenses in the entire NFL. In the 2018 wildcard game, the Panthers fell short to the division rival New Orleans Saints. In a 26-31 loss, Newton threw for 349 yards and 2 touchdowns. However, what made this game so heartbreaking was the final drive. Cam led this offense down the field with a chance to win it. However, due to his lack of protection, he threw a ball that got called back for intentional grounding, and then on a 4th and 23, Newton would get sacked by a slew of Saints defensive linemen. But Cam Newton proved in this playoff game that in the right circumstances, he can still be the leader of a playoff team, and that 2018 was going to be an exciting year. 2018 is the year everybody remembers as the demise of Cam Newton, but what absolutely sucks is it didn't start this way. In fact, it was quite the opposite. It started with a dominant 6-2 record, with many fans and analysts alike saying that Cam Newton was their early favorite to win MVP. It was electric, with wins over the Cowboys, Ravens, and defending Super Bowl champion Eagles. Things were rolling in Carolina. But then, on a Thursday night game in Pittsburgh against the very physical Steelers, disaster struck, as the Panthers lost 21-52, and worst of all, Cam Newton was thrown around like a rag doll, being hit every other play by an opposing defender. We didn't know it at the time, but this photo that highlights TJ Watt striking Cam Newton's throwing shoulder, the same one he had just had surgery on the year prior, was the end of Cam Newton's playing career. The Panthers said nothing about Cam Newton. He didn't even miss time, but he just didn't look quite right. After losses to the Lions, Seahawks, Buccaneers, Browns, and Saints, the Panthers officially announced that Newton would be shut down for the remainder of the season and that he would be undergoing a second surgery on his throwing shoulder, leaving the Panthers out of contention for 2018. Fans had 2 sets of expectations for Cam Newton in 2019, with half thinking he'd come back in his early 2018 form, and the other half thinking he'd come back more like the end of 2018. However, both predictions were wrong, as Cam Newton was straight awful in the 2 games that he'd appeared in. Starting in Week 1 against the defending NFC champion Rams, Newton looked terrible, throwing for just 239 yards, with his longest pass being only 17 yards and 0 touchdowns. If it hadn't have been for Christian McCaffrey, the Panthers would have gotten shut out. Then in Week 2 against the pretty awful Buccaneers, Newton threw for more yards, but he still just looked like a shell of himself. There was no explosion, no quick first step, no great runs, and he still hadn't scored a touchdown. On the final play of a potential game-winning drive, the Panthers were on the verge of the Buccaneers' goal line, and instead of letting their 6'5", 250-pound beast of a quarterback bulldoze his way in for what most would think is an easy game-winning touchdown, which is what would have happened in almost any other situation, Ron Rivera decided to put Newton in motion, have Christian McCaffrey take a direct snap, flip it to Curtis Samuel, back to McCaffrey, only to be inches short of the first down. After this game, the Panthers announced that Cam Newton Newton would be out for the remainder of the 2019 season due to a lisfranc foot injury. This would make the last play decision of not giving Cam Newton the ball to run it in make a lot more sense. If he had complained about some discomfort on the sideline, then Ron Rivera probably wasn't going to let him run in this ball. He did not want to get him hurt, and then his x-rays came back with a devastating foot injury. This was not looking good. This was basically the nail in the coffin for Cam Newton's success, as he could no longer throw bombs over the top of defenders, and he no longer had that explosive run that got him so many extra yards and touchdowns. Cam Newton was washed, but people like myself and other Panthers fans still had hope that maybe, just maybe, Cam Newton could come back healthy and ball out in 2020. But that would come under a new head coach, as Ron Rivera was fired after several subpar seasons in a row. In January, Baylor head coach Matt Rhule was brought in, and this was seen as a great move, with Rhule being seen as an offensive mastermind in college. During the combine, he even said that he was looking forward to working with Cam Newton. However, his tune changed on March 24, 2020, when the Panthers decided to cut Cam, making him a free agent for the first time in his career. This day was a hard one for me. Cam Newton was my childhood. He was the first draft pick I really remember being excited about as a Panthers fan. He embodied the city of Charlotte, and it was going to be hard to see him in another uniform. In June, Cam Newton signed a deal with the New England Patriots, and the thought was that if anyone could revive Newton's career, it was Bill Belichick. The Cam Newton era in New England started on a high note with a 21-11 victory over the Dolphins. Newton didn't really throw much, only throwing 19 passes, completing 15 of them for 155 yards, no touchdowns, but on the ground he would score 2 touchdowns. The season as a whole wouldn't go this way, as the Patriots would go 7-8. Cam Newton would throw for just 2,600 yards, throwing 8 touchdowns and 10 interceptions. However, he would run in 12 touchdowns. But it was clear, Belichick was done. He didn't want Cam Newton around, so the Patriots drafted Mac Jones in the first round of the 2021 draft, and there was a quarterback battle that saw Jones beat out Cam Newton. And before the season started, the Patriots would cut Newton, going all in on Mac Jones, putting Cam Newton out of the NFL for 3 months, until the unthinkable happened.
We have breaking news!
Whoa!
Cam Newton has signed with the Panthers!
Wow.
That's right, the Carolina Panthers brought Cam Newton back on a short deal due to Sam Darnold going down with an injury, and the hope was basically that Cam Newton could put butts in seats, with fans getting extremely unhappy with Matt Rhule and David Tepper, causing them not really to show up to games. Cam Newton could change that, and his first game against the Arizona Cardinals was absolutely special. Newton served as the backup to PJ Walker, but the Panthers put him in on short third downs and goal line situations. Rocking that iconic number 1 on second and goal, Cam Newton would score his first touchdown back in the league, and he made sure to let everyone, and I mean everyone, know. The Panthers would beat the 8-1 Cardinals, and the next week, Cam Newton was named the starter against the Washington football team. This was Newton's opportunity to play against his former head coach, Ron Rivera, and he played really well in his first home game back at the bank. However, the Panthers would fall short, and the rest of the season didn't really go as planned. The Panthers lost out, going 5-12. Cam Newton would finish the season with 684 yards in 8 games, throwing 4 touchdowns, running in 5, and 5 interceptions. During this season, Cam Newton and Matt Rhule just didn't see eye to eye. Both Newton and Rhule complained about the other inadvertently to the media in cryptic messages, and let's just say at the end of the year, QB1 was not brought back to Charlotte, officially putting an end to his NFL career. Today, Cam Newton is a podcaster who hosts a show weekly talking about different NFL events and also his former team, the Carolina Panthers. He often says that he could play in the NFL today and that there's not 32 guys better than him. But the facts are the facts. When Cam Newton had a shoulder and foot injury back-to-back, that put his chances of being a top quarterback to bed. Newton is now 35 years old, and he says his return to the game is unlikely. This fall is heartbreaking, as Cam Newton serves as my favorite player of all time. I never gave up on this guy, supporting him in whatever situation he was in. Cam Newton was a special player with a devastating downfall.